I reckon before I start telling you this, I ought to ask something of you. If you find yourself walking alongside me through this story, if the words stir something in you, loneliness, hope, maybe the quiet sort of courage, then don't forget to like the video, leave a comment down below, and follow the channel. Tell us where you're listening from too. Folks like me, we live a long way from anyone most days. But stories like this carry different when they're shared. Now, I'll take you back to the spring of 1881, Arizona Territory, Copper Ridge Country. The land was dry as bone, punished by the sun, and so quiet you could hear the grit of sand against your teeth when the wind rose. It wasn't gentle land, not the kind that gives without first asking for blood. I had come out looking for 3 stray head that cut north out of my fence line. Their prints were easy enough to follow, shallow tracks in baked soil, split hoof marks pressed like old scars. I was 36 then, older than I felt some days, younger than the wear in my bones other times. Born in Missouri, soldiered too young, fought a war I didn't believe in, then wandered through the kind of work men take when they've got no tether. Mining, cattle, bounty riding, none of it stuck. I ended up on this piece of land after the fire took my wife and little girl. That was 3 winters past. Since then, it had just been me, my horse, and the work. Most days I carried on in silence. Folks in Copper Ridge said I'd gone half mad, and maybe they weren't wrong. That morning the sky had the look of iron. Heat shimmered off the ravine ahead, a trick of light that made the rocks quiver in the distance. Brisk my gelding slowed at the edge. His ears pricked, nostrils widening. I knew the feel of a horse warning me. Something was down there, something that didn't belong. I dismounted slow, rifle hanging easy from my back, hand brushing the revolver at my side. My boots scuffed over loose dirt, and the smell hit me before I saw it. Blood baked into the sand, sharp and bitter. Then came the other signs. A torn strip of blue cloth, a broken lance, the scattered tracks of men running hard. There'd been a fight here not more than a few days before. That's when I saw her. At first I thought she was dead. She lay twisted at the base of the slope, half covered in grit, arms splayed like she'd fallen from a height. Her dress, once bone-stitched, was torn wide, the skin beneath blistered raw from the sun. The stench of dried sweat and blood hung heavy. I nearly turned back until I caught the faintest rise and fall of her chest. She was Apache, that much I saw plain. Her lips cracked, eyes half closed, but still alive. The bindings at her thighs told the rest of the story. Crude cuts wrapped in hide, wounds angry but not yet rotten, both legs gone from the blast. I stood there longer than I should have, weighing it. I knew what it meant if I carried her home. A wounded Apache, woman under my roof, was the kind of trouble that could see me strung up if the wrong men came knocking. Folks in town wouldn't call it mercy. They'd call it treason. And even if no one knew, taking her in meant risking time, risking care I wasn't sure I had left to give. But leaving her, she wouldn't last another hour under that sun. I took off my hat, ran a hand over my jaw, looked around once, as if the desert might give me an answer. Nothing but wind. So I stepped forward, bent low, and slid my arms under her back and knees, what was left of them. Her body flinched when I touched her, eyes flickering open just enough to catch mine. She didn't beg, didn't plead, just looked at me steady, like a woman waiting for judgment. I felt the weight of her then, light as kindling and yet heavier than anything I'd carried in years. She groaned once, low and broken, but I didn't set her down. I shifted her against my chest, turned back toward Brisk. and lifted her across the saddle before swinging up behind. The ride home was slow. Dust trailed off the hooves, the wind pressing hard at my back. She didn't move much. Just once I felt her head tilt against my chest, a breath drawn sharp like she might try to speak, then nothing more. I held her steady with one arm, reins loose in the other, and let the silence swallow the miles between that ravine and my cabin. By the time I rode in, the light was turning low, the shadows stretching long over the barn. The house looked smaller than it ever had. One-room pine patched with iron sheet, shutters rattling in the wind. I pushed through the door, carried her straight to my cot, and laid her down as gently as I knew how. She didn't say a word. Her eyes moved slow across the walls, taking in the shelves, the rifle by the door, the coat hanging on a peg. She was still in the fight, even if her body wasn't. And me, I just stood there for a spell, staring at her, knowing in that moment nothing about my life would stay the same. I carried her through the door like I'd carried sacks of grain in other years. Only this weight wasn't something I could drop without consequence. My cabin wasn't much to look at. One room built with my own hands, patched and weathered, but it was all I had. And now it was hers too, whether I meant for it or not. I laid her down on the cot, thin blanket and one worn pillow, and for the first time since I'd lifted her, I let myself take a breath. Her eyes followed me, sharp even through the fever glaze, as if she were memorizing every corner, every tool, every weapon on the wall. I knew that look. It was the look of someone still in the fight, no matter what the world had already taken from her. I fetched clean water from the barrel, set the cloth to boil, and dragged the old stool close to rest her legs. When I pulled the torn dress higher to see the wounds, she tensed, but she didn't stop me. The stumps were raw and angry, swollen at the edges, but they weren't rotting yet. I washed them with careful hands, pine sap pressed into the splits, strips torn from a bedsheet wound tight again. My hands were rough, calloused from years of work, but I moved slow, deliberate, the way I once handled my little girl when she burned her palm on the stove. She didn't cry, not a sound, not even when I pressed hardest to stop the bleeding. I saw her jaw lock, saw her chest rise steady, and something in me shifted. This woman had been left in the dirt to die, but she wasn't done yet. By the time the sun fell, I had her covered again. I lit the lamp, sat across the room at the table, and watched her chest rise and fall. She looked like a body pulled from fire, skin blistered, lips cracked, but the fight in her hadn't gone out. I wondered if I'd done right, if by saving her I'd only doomed us both. A man could get killed in these parts for less than harboring an Apache woman, but the thought of leaving her in that ravine, knowing she would have died by now, burned worse in me than any risk I was taking. Before dawn, she stirred, and I heard the rasp of her breath before her eyes opened. She reached down and touched the place where her legs should have been. And though she didn't cry, I saw the tightness in her throat, the way her chest shook once before she steadied herself. She didn't move for a long while, not until my boots crossed the dirt outside. I came back in with a tin bowl, bread soaked in broth, and set it beside her on the crate I used as a nightstand. She didn't reach for it, just looked at me like she was weighing who I was, whether I meant to keep her alive or finish the job someone else had started. I nodded once, turned for the door, and that's when she rasped the first word, "Silent man." Her voice cracked dry, but it held a kind of grit I hadn't heard in years. I paused at the door but didn't turn. I just let the words settle and walked back outside. That morning, the wind came up strong, rattling the shutters and shaking dust across the porch. When I returned mid-morning with chopped kindling, she was propped against the wall, blanket pulled over her stumps, eyes clearer than the night before. She didn't flinch when I stepped inside. She just watched me, followed me with those sharp eyes as I set the wood by the stove, and went about the work of keeping the fire steady. When I passed near her, I saw her fingers twitch, like she wanted to move herself, shift upright, maybe even crawl. She slipped once, winced, and I crouched beside her. "You'll rip your stitches," I muttered. My voice came rough from disuse. She stared at me like she hadn't expected me to speak. Lips parted, eyes locked. That was the first full sentence I'd given her since the ravine. I pulled a chair I'd cut down years ago when my hip wouldn't bend right anymore and set it beside her cot. "Try this," I said, pointing at the arms. "Slide forward, steady. I'll hold your back." She didn't answer, but she moved. Strong arms, jaw clenched, dragging herself until her weight shifted into the chair. I steadied her without pressing, hands firm at her back, and when she settled, I stepped away. She sat there breathing hard, palms pressed to what remained of her thighs, but she didn't ask for help. Her eyes flicked around the cabin again, slower this time, less like a scout measuring an enemy, more like someone trying to understand where she'd landed. "You live here alone?" she asked, voice low. I nodded. Her eyes studied me, my rough face, my stained shirt, the scar running from jaw to ear, the limp in my right leg. Then she looked down at herself, blanket hiding what she'd lost. "You could have left me." "I didn't," I said. The silence that came after wasn't hostile. It was heavy, like dust that settles after a storm, thick enough to make breathing hard, but clean once it clears. I busied myself at the stove, scooped some food into a bowl, and this time when I set it in her hands, she ate slow. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't let me feed her. Pride held her steady, pride and that same fury I'd seen in her eyes since I first touched her. Later that afternoon, I came back in from the shed and found her dragging herself across the floor, sweat running down her face, blankets slipped aside. She looked up, breath ragged. "I'm not going to rot in that bed," she muttered. I didn't argue. I just lifted her back onto the cot, steady as ever, then walked out again into the wind. That night, while the lamp burned low, I sat at the table with cedar and nails, breaking apart an old chair and shaping something new. A platform on wheels, low to the ground, padded with cloth. I didn't know if it would hold her. I didn't know if she'd curse me for pity. But I knew she'd need more than my arms if she meant to keep living. And as I tested the weight with my own hands, I felt something stir I hadn't felt in years. Not duty, not charity, something closer to belonging. I worked half the night on that contraption, oil lamp swinging above me in the barn, while Brisk shifted his weight in the stall. The sound of the saw cutting through pine echoed low, mixed with the steady thud of hammer against nail. My hands remembered the shape of work they hadn't done in years, building something not for myself, but for someone else. When I finally set the pieces together, I had a crude rolling platform. Just a low seat with rails on the side, and wheels salvaged from an old cart padded with scraps of cloth. I pressed my weight into it, half expecting it to splinter, but it held. For the first time in years, I felt the faint thrum of purpose I hadn't known I was missing. By morning, I carried it into the cabin. She was sitting propped against the cot, arms braced, blanket over her stumps. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me, suspicion sharp as a blade. I set the thing down in front of her and didn't say a word. She stared at it, then at me, then back again, as if deciding whether I meant to mock her. "You made this," she said finally. I shrugged, trying to keep my voice plain. "Might help you get around." Her fingers touched the rail, slow, testing. I expected anger, maybe pride to flare up, but instead her face softened just enough to show something else, something closer to relief. "I don't beg," she said, almost like a warning. "Ja, you didn't," I answered. That was enough. I helped her into it, hands steady under her back. And when she sat upright, she gripped the rails tight. Her arms trembled as she pushed forward. The wheels scraped against the floor, uneven but moving. She cursed under her breath, half in Apache, half in English, and I bit back a smile. She pivoted awkwardly at first, almost tipped, then steadied herself against the table. I saw her jaw set hard. She was determined to master it, even if it tore her palms raw. The first few days, I stayed close without saying much. She pulled herself from the cot to the stove, from the stove to the water barrel, slow as molasses but steady. When she dropped the kettle once and nearly spilled boiling water across her arm, I caught it in time. She didn't thank me. She just nodded and tried again. By the end of the week, the blisters on her palms had turned to calluses. She was stronger already. She stopped calling me Silent Man. Now, when she needed me, she just said my name. Wade, soft, simple, without edge. The first time she said it, I felt something in me loosen like a knot pulled free. One evening I was at the fire, whittling a piece of cedar when she asked, "You fought?" I looked up from the blade, surprised she'd broken the silence. I held her eyes for a long second before answering. "Yeah, Confederate Missouri Battalion." She stared at me, not flinching, just weighing the truth. "And now you help me?" she said, voice low. I turned the wood in my hands, let the shavings fall to the floor. "War is done," I muttered. That was all I gave her, but the way she looked at me that night, steady and long, told me she was wondering how a man who once fought against her people could kneel beside her cot and wash her wounds without hesitation. Truth is, I'd been asking myself the same thing. 2 days later, fever hit her. It started with sweat, then shivering that rattled her thin frame. By nightfall, her skin burned hot as the stove. She clawed at the blanket, mumbling names in Apache, her lips cracked and dry. I sat beside her, pressing cool cloths to her chest, forcing willow bark water between her lips. She spit it up once, but I tried again, steady, refusing to let her give in. When she clawed at me in the dark, nails digging into my arm, I held her shoulders down gently, not moving until the worst of it passed. That night she whispered one name clearer than the rest, Tana. I figured it was her brother. I didn't know if he was alive or dead, but I knew what it was to be haunted by family you couldn't save. By morning the fever broke. Her eyes opened heavy, searching. "You stayed," she rasped. I nodded. "You're still here." It wasn't much, but I heard what she meant. No one had stayed for her before, not since that ravine. And for me, it had been years since I'd had someone worth staying for. The days after, we fell into rhythm. I rose before sunup, worked the horses, split wood, hauled water. She moved herself through the cabin, practicing turns, reaching shelves, finding her way without asking. When I left an old shirt folded at the foot of her cot one morning, she slipped into it without hesitation. It hung loose on her shoulders, cinched with a belt she'd sewn herself. It suited her. She looked less like a woman clinging to life and more like someone shaping it again. One night, as we sat across from each other at the table, She set down her spoon and asked, "Why didn't you shoot me when you found me?" I froze, the question heavy as iron. She didn't look away. "I don't fight women," I said. "That ain't an answer." I glanced toward the window, the sky dark beyond. I saw someone hurt left behind, that's all. She let the silence hang a long while, then whispered, "I was left behind once already. I won't be again." Her eyes burned when she said it, sharp as the edge of the knife she kept tucked under her blanket. I understood then that what she wanted wasn't pity, wasn't saving. It was choice. A chance to stand or sit or fight on her own terms. And I knew, watching her steady herself in that chair I built, that I'd do whatever it took to make sure no one left her behind again. The fever near took her from me. I'd seen men burn like that after wounds in the war, strong one day, gone the next. And I feared I was about to watch it happen all over again. Her skin went hot as iron, her breath ragged and shallow, eyes rolling like she was chasing ghosts I couldn't see. I sat beside her through every hour, cloths damp with cold water pressed against her chest, drops of bitter willow bark tea forced between her lips. She spat most of it out, cursed me in her language, but I kept at it, steady as I knew how. I wasn't about to leave her. More than once she clawed at me in the dark, nails digging into my arm hard enough to draw blood, whispering names I couldn't make out. One came clearer than the rest, Tana. I guessed it was her brother, the one who cut her legs free and left her there. I didn't know if he was alive or dead, but I knew that edge in her voice, the mix of anger and love you can't sort clean. I carried it myself for years, thinking on the faces of men I couldn't save, thinking on my wife and little girl swallowed by fire while I stood outside the door, too late to pull them free. Some wounds never stopped bleeding inside. When dawn finally broke and her eyes cleared a little, she whispered, "You stayed." I nodded, too tired to say much. "You're still here," she said, voice weak but steady. And for the first time I heard something in her tone that wasn't defiance, it was trust. I realized then how long it had been since anyone had looked at me that way. Folks in Copper Ridge looked at me like I was broken, a man who talked too little and lived too far from town. But her eyes held something different. She saw me sitting there, weary and hollow, but she saw me. The fever left her weak, but little by little her strength returned. Each day she pushed herself further in that chair I'd built. She scraped it across the floor until her hands blistered. Then she pushed again. She learned the corners of the cabin, the reach of the shelves, the way to brace herself against the stove without toppling. And I watched her, not as a burden, but as proof that life can be carried forward even when it looks like it's done. One evening she broke the silence again. "You fought for them," she said. I was whittling near the fire, cedar shavings scattered at my boots. I didn't answer at first, but her eyes didn't leave me. "Yeah," I said finally. "Confederate Missouri Battalion." She studied me long and hard. "And now you save me." "War's over," I muttered, though I knew it wasn't that simple. The truth was I didn't believe in sides anymore. I only believed in what was right in front of me. This woman breathing because I refused to let her die. The nights grew quieter after that. She ate at the table with me, spoon trembling in her hand but steady enough to feed herself. She didn't ask questions about my past, though I could feel her watching me sometimes, her eyes lingering on the coat still hanging by the door, the one that belonged to my wife. I caught her once staring at the small trunk under the bed. She didn't open it. She just looked and then turned away. She respected my silence the way I respected her scars. That was our agreement, spoken without words. Still, she tested me sometimes. Her dress had torn from the dragging, shoulders bare, fabric loose across her chest. I caught her watching me as I chopped onions at the table. "Doesn't bother you?" she asked. "You're a woman," I said simply. She scoffed. "A broken one." "No," I told her, looking her straight in the eye. "Just that." That night, she didn't pull the blanket so high. She didn't turn away when I helped her back into the cot. She held my gaze full on. And I saw something I hadn't seen in her before, a spark, not of anger or survival, but of wanting to be seen, not pitied. "You ain't scared of me," she said, voice testing. "No," I replied. "Why?" I held her eyes steady as the fire burning low. "Because you're alive." Her breath eased out slow, and then she smiled. Not wide, not long, but real. That was the first time I felt something shift between us. The silence we shared no longer felt like two strangers measuring each other. It felt like a rope being tied, knot by knot, holding us in place. I stayed near the stove that night, whittling in the lamplight, but I kept glancing at her. She lay on the cot, bare shoulders glinting in the glow, chest rising even, eyes closed at last without that tight furrow of pain. And I thought to myself, maybe we weren't two broken souls trying to outlast the desert. Maybe we were the proof that being left behind didn't mean the end. I'd lost everything once. She had too. But now we sat in the same room, breathing the same air, tied by something neither of us had asked for. I didn't know what it was yet. Not love, not duty, but something that made me believe I wasn't as alone as I thought. The wind rattled the shutters. The dust swirled outside. And still she slept, trusting me to keep the fire steady through the night. For the first time in years, I wanted to. The days settled into something I hadn't known in a long time. Routine, quiet, but not the kind of quiet that weighed heavy on a man. It was different with her there. I'd rise before the sun, same as always, limp across the yard to feed the horses, split wood, haul water, the sound of my boots against the frozen ground used to echo back at me, proof that no one else was listening. But now, when I came back through the door, there she was, already awake, propped on that rolling seat I'd built, hands blistered from the rails but stronger with each passing day. She didn't speak much, and neither did I, but something grew in those silences. I'd catch her studying the way my hands worked the axe, the way I whittled cedar in the evenings, or how I shifted my bad hip before sitting down. And I watched her too, not as a wounded woman, not as an Apache left behind, but as someone who refused to let the world take more than it already had. She cursed often, low and sharp, when her arms shook, or when the wheels caught against the floorboards, but then she'd set her jaw and try. I came to respect that more than any achievement. One morning I left a folded shirt at the foot of her cot. It was one of mine, worn soft with years, buttons still strong. I didn't say a thing, just set it there before heading into the barn. When I came back in, she was wearing it, cinched with a belt she'd cut from scrap leather. She didn't thank me, but she didn't need to. The way she wore it told me enough. She wasn't clinging to the woman who had been left in the ravine anymore. She was becoming someone who meant to stay alive, even here. Meals were simpler with her. I'd set the bowls on the table, and instead of eating apart like I once did out of habit, I'd find myself pulling the chair closer. The first night I did that, she lifted an eyebrow and asked, "You gonna sit with me now?" I nodded. Seemed right. So we ate together, spoons scraping against tin, the lamp burning low between us. She moved slower than me, deliberate in every bite. But she didn't look away from me as much anymore. Sometimes she asked questions. "You always this quiet?" she said once, chewing slow, eyes on me. "Talk when I need to," I told her. "Guess I talk enough for both," she muttered, and the corner of her mouth twitched like she wanted to smile. I caught myself nearly smiling back. Nah. At night, I'd still sit by the stove, knife in hand, whittling shapes from cedar just to keep my hands busy. She'd watch me, leaning back on her cot, the lamplight painting her shoulders in gold. I never asked what she was thinking, and she never asked me why I carved. But the silence wasn't empty. It carried weight, steady and grounding. I hadn't felt that kind of silence since before the fire took my wife and daughter. Back then, silence had meant safety, warmth. With her, it started to feel that way again. Once, when the wind blew sharp against the cabin walls, she asked me, "Why didn't you leave me there?" I set the knife down, met her eyes. "Because you were still breathing. That's all. That's enough." She stared at me a long time after that, lips parted like she had more to say, but she didn't. Instead, she pulled the blanket higher and closed her eyes. For me, the words I'd given her were the truth. I didn't need more reason than life itself. The next morning, I found her outside on the porch. She'd wrestled her way down the ramp I built, arms shaking from the strain, blanket pulled over her lap. She sat with her face lifted toward the early light, the wind teasing strands of her black hair. When she heard my boots on the steps, she didn't turn. "Smells like fire," she said. I glanced at the horizon. Brush burning, someone clearing land. She nodded, eyes still closed. "Feels good, though." I lowered myself beside her, hat resting in my lap. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. We just sat shoulder to shoulder, the sound of the wind moving through mesquite brush all around us. And when her shoulder brushed mine, I didn't move away. She didn't either. That night she tested me again. "You ain't scared of me," she said, eyes catching mine in the firelight. "No." "Why?" "Because you're alive." Her breath caught, and then she let it out slow. That was the night she smiled for real. A small thing, quick as the flicker of a flame, but it settled something in me I hadn't realized was restless. I lay in bed later, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. She was asleep on the cot, blanket tangled, chest rising even. For the first time in years, I felt that same old ache shift inside me. Not the ache of loss, but the ache of wanting to stay awake just to keep watching someone breathe. We didn't speak of it, not then. We didn't need to. The bond was building itself out of the spaces between our words, out of the things we didn't say. And I knew in my bones, though I hadn't admitted it yet, that I'd already crossed a line I couldn't come back from. I wasn't just keeping her alive anymore. She was keeping me alive too, though she didn't know it yet. She asked me once, near the end of a meal, if I'd bring her outside. The lamp was still burning, bowls half finished on the table, and her eyes were steady on me. "I need the wind," she said. I hesitated, glancing towards the door, half afraid of what a passerby might see, though truth be told, no one came this far out anymore. She tilted her head, reading the silence in me, and added, "There's no one out there." So I lifted her, blanket over her lap, and carried her onto the porch. I'd padded the bench there with old wool, and I set her down gentle, making sure she was comfortable before I sat beside her. The sky stretched wide, streaked with orange and purple, the last of the day bleeding out slow across the hills. She closed her eyes and tilted her face upward, breathing in deep like the air itself was medicine. "Smells like fires not far," she murmured. "Someone burning brush," I said. "Early clearing." She didn't ask to go back in. She stayed still, eyes closed, lips parted slightly, the wind pulling strands of her hair loose across her cheeks. I sat quiet, hat resting in my lap, and for the first time I felt her shoulder brush against mine, not by accident, not testing, but choosing. I didn't move away. We sat that way for a long time, the silence thick but steady until she spoke again. "You ever touch a woman like this?" Her words caught me off guard. I turned my head slow. "Like what?" "Not out of duty, not out of pity. Just touch." Her eyes were on me then, open and unflinching, and I saw the question there, sharp and soft, all at once. The shirt she wore, one of mine, hung loose, collarbones bare where the buttons didn't quite meet. The lamplight from inside spilled across her skin, catching the curve of her neck, the scar that cut across her thigh beneath the blanket. "I'm not broken," she said, voice low but fierce. "Don't look at me like I'm a ghost." "I don't," I answered, steady. Her hand moved slow across the bench, found mine and lifted it. She guided my palm down to her hip, to the curve of what remained of her body, scarred but warm, and alive beneath my fingers. My hand twitched, instinct to pull back, but she held it there, strong. "I can't feel it like before," she whispered, "but I still want it." My breath came deeper, slower, and when I leaned toward her, she met me halfway. Her lips brushed my cheek first, tentative, then found my mouth. The kiss was soft, not hurried, not hungry, but like it meant something more than either of us had spoken aloud. When we broke apart, she searched my face, calm, unafraid. "You sure?" I asked, my voice rough. "I know what I want," she said. I lifted her again, carried her back inside, laid her down on the cot. She pulled the blanket aside, unfastened the belt at her waist, and let the shirt fall open. Her body was thin, marked with scars, curved in places, uneven in others, but she didn't hide. She looked at me full on, daring me to see her as less. I didn't. I undressed without shame, my own body carrying its own ghosts, old bullet scars, ribs visible from lean years, skin weathered by sun and work. She reached out, traced the scar along my hip with her fingers and said, "You ain't the only one with ghosts." That night we lay together slow. It wasn't about need. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about understanding, about claiming life when it had almost been taken from us. Her mouth pressed against my chest. My lips brushed the scar along her thigh. And when I moved over her, I did it careful, steady, as if every part of her was still sacred. When it was over, I didn't roll away. I stayed, her breath warm against my skin, her hand resting on my chest, fingers tracing the beat of my heart, like she was making sure it still ran. She whispered once, soft as a prayer, "You could have left me." "But I didn't," I said. And in the dark, with the fire low and the shutters rattling from the wind, I realized I didn't need to say anything more. We had said enough. I woke first, as I always did, before the light touched the edges of the cabin. She was still against me, her hand curled loose at my ribs, her breath even. I eased out from beneath her careful, pulled the blanket up to her bare shoulders, and dressed in silence. My chest felt tight, but not from grief, not from loneliness. It was something fuller, heavier in a different way, and I carried it with me when I stepped outside into the cold. The frost clung to the edges of the trough. The horses shifted quiet in their stalls, but my thoughts stayed inside with her. The way she had held my hand against her scar, the way her lips had sought mine, the way she'd said she wanted. It had been years since anyone wanted me, and I hadn't realized how much I still needed it. When I came back in, she was awake, sitting up with the blanket drawn across her lap. Her eyes found mine, steady, unflinching. I saw no fear there, no shame, only a woman who had chosen, and in her choice, she'd given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace in these parts never lasted. I knew that from years of living alone, and I knew it even clearer with her sitting under my roof. Days passed in rhythm, simple as splitting wood and hearing the scrape of her chair across the floor. But beneath it all, I waited for the sound of hooves. Trouble always came from the east trail sooner or later. It was a late morning when I heard her voice cut across the yard. "There's someone coming." I straightened from the back gate where I'd been mending posts, wiped the sweat from my brow, and looked where she pointed. Dust rose along the ridge. One rider, not fast but steady. My stomach tightened the way it always did before a fight. She rolled herself under the overhang near the chicken coop, eyes sharp. Her hand slipped under the blanket where she kept the knife I'd left her weeks back. She was ready, scarred or not. And the sight of her like that, waiting to defend what little we had, made something burn in me deeper than fear. The rider came closer, a mule, not a horse, and a thin man draped in a long coat. He raised one hand in a lazy wave, like he was neighborly, but I didn't trust the look in his eyes. "Friendly," Sokka called from her shadowed spot. "Don't smell like cavalry," I muttered, already reaching for the rifle, leaning by the door. The man dismounted slow, tied his mule to a post, and looked around as if measuring the land. "You Holt?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes on him. He pulled a folded paper from his coat, careful like. "Marshall sent me from Copper Ridge. Folks been spooked by Apache movement east of the gulch. They want reports." I took the paper, glanced over the seal. It looked official enough, but his eyes told me more than the paper did. They were hunting for something specific, not just riders in the hills. "You live out here alone?" he asked. "Quiet suits me," I said. He squinted past me, toward the coop where Sokka hid just out of sight. "Thought I saw movement." "Chickens," I said flat. He looked at me a long beat, then tipped his hat. "Well, if you see anything strange, uniforms, riders, an Apache woman left for dead, you send word." I didn't move until he climbed back on his mule and rode off. Not fast, not slow, just the pace of a man carrying half-truths. Only when the dust settled did Sokka wheel herself back into view. "That gonna be a problem?" she asked. "Not today," I said, though I knew in my gut it wouldn't end there. 2 days later, it was worse. Not a scout this time, but soldiers. 2 of them in military coats, one mounted, the other already on the ground, with papers in hand. They didn't knock. They called out from the fence line like they owned the place. "We're here on Marshall's order, looking for a native woman named Sokka, absconded after engagement with U.S. military forces." I stepped out slow, rifle visible but not raised. "She's not here." The one on the ground held up his paper. "We got orders to search the premises." "You got a warrant?" he asked. "This is from the Arizona Territorial Marshal himself." "That ain't what I asked." They didn't like that, but they pushed forward anyway, walking into the cabin, opening the barn doors, checking corners. They didn't know what to look for, didn't think to lift the rug or test the floorboards. They didn't know about the trap door I'd built after her fever just in case. Beneath that floor, she lay still as stone, knife clutched in her hand, dirt pressing into her palms. I stood at the door, calm as I could manage, answering their questions with shrugs, giving them nothing. My heart hammered in, my chest, but my face didn't show it. "You sure no one's been by?" the taller one asked when they mounted again. "We've had sightings." "I ain't seen anyone," I said. When they were finally gone, I waited a full hour before I pulled the trap door up. She was covered in sweat, eyes wild, breath ragged but alive. I hauled her out, and she clung to me longer than she ever had before. "You didn't blink," she whispered. "No reason to," I said, though inside I felt the fire of knowing just how close we'd come. That night we didn't talk much. I stocked the cellar with lamp oil, food, and rifles. She sat carving beads from bone, her hands steady though her eyes were sharp with fury. When I passed close, she pressed one bead into my hand. "No words," she said. "Just keep it." I slid it into my pocket and didn't argue. Later, when the fire burned low, she leaned against me on the cot. Her voice was quiet, almost too soft to hear. "I'll kill for this place." "You understand that," she added. "I already have," I told her. She looked at me long, then kissed me slow. And in that moment, I knew the truth. It wasn't just my cabin anymore. It wasn't just her shelter. It was ours. And no matter who came riding up from Copper Ridge or Flagstaff or Washington itself, they'd have to come through me first. The morning after the soldiers rode off, the wind shifted east. It carried grit through the valley, whispering against the shutters, the kind of sound that told me nothing was settled. I spent most of the day tightening hinges on the barn doors, counting cartridges, making sure the rifle was cleaned and close. My hands worked out of habit, but my mind stayed on her. She sat by the doorway, wrapped in my old coat, her eyes fixed on the trail like she was waiting for the horizon to spit more trouble back at us. She hadn't said much since the men left. Neither had I. Sometimes silence carried more truth than words ever could. By late afternoon, I came inside, dust clinging to my shirt, sweat drying cold against my back. She wheeled herself to the table, looked at me hard, and said, "If they come again, they'll come with paper. Soldiers. Real ones." I leaned against the wall, nodded. "Yeah, you don't need to be here when that happens," I told her. Her jaw shifted, eyes narrowing. "I'm not running." "They'll call you fugitive. You know what they'll do if they catch you." Her voice came sharp. "Sure. I was already left for dead. I'm not leaving again." I stared at her, searching her face for even a flicker of doubt. There was none, just steady fire, cold and alive. "You sure?" I asked. She turned her head, locked eyes with me in that way of hers that always cut deeper than words. "You my husband or not?" That shut me up. I felt the weight of it settle in my chest, heavier than any badge or paper I'd ever carried. Husband. No preacher, no vows, no rings. Just her voice cutting straight through the fear. I didn't correct her, didn't want to. Something in me eased, the kind of easing a man only feels when he finally lets go of the question he's been carrying. That night we reinforced the barn wall together. Me hammering thick planks into place, her sitting by the ramp, braiding strips of leather into something useful. The sound of my hammering echoed across the valley, mixing with the rasp of her knife-cutting bone. When I finally set the hammer down, she held up 2 beads she'd carved, small, intricate, shaped like narrow shells. She tied one to her necklace, then slipped the other into my hand without a word. I didn't argue, just slid it into my pocket with the first bead she'd given me. Days passed like that, slow but steady. I stalked the cellar beneath the floor, laid blankets, stashed water, checked the trapdoor twice over. She practiced with her knife, the blade flashing in lamplight, her arms stronger each day. But more than that, something unspoken grew between us. Not just survival anymore, not just waiting, a kind of belonging that made each silence feel full instead of empty. One evening, after we'd eaten in the lamplight, she sat close enough that her knee brushed mine. Her voice came quiet, softer than I'd ever heard it. I never thought I'd belong anywhere again. I looked at her, the lamplight flickering across her scarred face, her dark eyes steady and unafraid. "You do now," I said. Her breath caught, and for a long moment she just held my gaze. Then she leaned forward and kissed me slow, and not with hunger, not with fear, but with something deeper. When she pulled back, her hand stayed against my cheek, thumb brushing the stubble along my jaw. That was the night she called me husband again, whispered it against my chest as she lay curled into me. And I let the words sink into me, warm and solid. Husband. It didn't matter that the world outside would spit on it. It mattered that she'd said it, that I'd felt it. The next morning I woke to find her already at the table stitching a sash out of one of my old shirts. Thick thread cut across the cloth, letters uneven but bold. Still, it read. She tied it around her chest, across scars and curves, and when she caught me watching, she said, "I'm not hiding anymore." I didn't answer, just nodded once. But inside, I felt something stir. Pride, maybe, respect, certainly. Love, though I hadn't let myself name it yet. From then on, every chore, every small act in that cabin felt different. When I brushed dust off her shoulder as I passed, she didn't turn away. When she reached out to steady me as my hip gave out near the stove, I didn't pull back. When we sat on the porch at dusk, watching the light fade, the silence between us felt less like two survivors and more like two people who'd chosen to stay. Belonging wasn't something I thought I'd feel again. Not after the fire, not after the war, not after all the years of carrying silence like a weight I couldn't put down. But there she was, sharp-eyed and scarred, refusing to run, refusing to let me stand alone. And I realized then that the word she'd spoken, husband, wasn't just hers. It was mine too. It was near the end of June when I finally hitched Brisk to the wagon and laid a bed of blankets in the back. I hadn't taken her more than a mile from the cabin since I carried her out of that ravine, but something in her eyes told me she was restless. She'd mastered the cabin, the ramp, even the yard, but the lawn beyond still pressed against her like a cage. So that morning, I helped her climb into the wagon, slow and careful, her arms braced strong against the rails. She flushed with the strain, but she didn't let me do it all for her. She wanted to feel the weight of her own choice, and I let her. We rode in silence, sun at our backs, the wheels creaking over dust and stone. The air smelled of mesquite and dry grass, the kind of smell that carried memory with it. I kept my eyes on the trail, but inside I was already thinking of the place we were going, a small creek bed I hadn't visited since before the fire. When we reached it, I pulled Brisk to a stop under a crooked cottonwood. Water still trickled there, green pushing up along the banks, a rare softness in land that was otherwise bone and grit. I climbed down, lifted her out of the wagon, and carried her to the patch of grass beneath the tree. She settled there, her fingers brushing the blades, eyes scanning the creek like she was taking stock of something she didn't yet trust to be real. I sat beside her, hat low in my lap, and for a long time neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, "I used to come here with my daughter." Her head turned toward me slow. "You never told me her name." "Mara," I said. The word caught in my throat, rough from years of not saying it aloud. She liked to watch the frogs, never caught one. A faint smile touched her lips. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "Maybe," I muttered. "You would have scared her." "Only a little," she said, her smile sharper now. And for a moment the air between us felt lighter, easier. We sat there a long while, the sound of water moving against stone filling the silence. Her shoulder leaned into mine, not heavy, just steady, and I let it stay there. My hand rested in the grass beside hers, close enough that our fingers brushed now and again, and each time it felt like a small truth neither of us had to name. After a while, she spoke again. "I've been thinking about the next part." I turned slightly, studying her face. "What next part?" "This isn't just surviving anymore," she said, eyes fixed on the creek. "Not for me." I let the words hang. She deserved the space to finish them herself. "I want to be more than safe," she went on. "I want to build something with you. Real." Then she turned, eyes hard and certain. "You ever think about starting again?" Her question struck me deep. I'd carried the weight of starting over for years, but always alone, always with silence for company. Now here she was, scarred and strong, asking me plain if I wanted to carry it with her. I swallowed hard, voice rough when I finally answered. "Every day since I met you." She reached to her belt, pulled a small leather pouch into her lap, and untied the cord. Inside lay a bone ring, carved smooth but uneven at the edges. She held it out to me, her hand steady. "I made it 2 nights ago, while you slept." I stared at it, the shape imperfect but strong, the kind of thing that carried meaning because it had been cut by her hands. "You took me in when I was nothing but blood and bone," she said quietly. "No legs, no kin, no name left. You stayed. That's more than most men would do for a wife." The word hit me square. Wife. Not whispered this time, not half hidden in the dark, but spoken full in daylight. I took the ring, turned it once in my palm, then slipped it onto my finger. The fit was rough, but it settled there like it belonged. And I looked at her and said, "Then I guess I'm her husband now." "You always were," she replied. The truth of it settled between us, heavier than the sun, heavier than the silence, and yet light, in a way that made breathing easier. I felt her hand slide into mine, our fingers lacing slow, sure, and I held on like it was the only thing that had ever made sense. We rode back before the sun dropped low. The land stretched golden around us, the wagon creaking steady, Brisk's ears flicking at flies. She leaned against me in the wagon bed, head resting against my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of what I'd lost pressing harder than what I still had. That night she cooked cornbread from scratch. First time I'd seen her try it, start to finish. She cursed half the way through, burned the edge black, and nearly tossed the pan into the yard. But when she set it in front of me, I ate every bite with a straight face. "Best damn bread I ever had," I said. She narrowed her eyes, saw straight through me. But the smile that came after was worth the lie. Later, when I carried her to the cot, she pulled me down beside her before I could step away. Her voice was firm, almost daring. "You're not sleeping on that chair again." So I stayed. Blankets tangled around us, her hand resting on my chest, her breath slow and even against my neck. And as I lay there with her, the carved bone ring tight on my finger, I realized I wasn't just a man who had taken in a woman left for dead. I was a husband again, And she, against all odds, was a wife who had chosen me. Before I get into this last piece of our story, I want to ask something of you. If you've walked with me through all of this, if you've felt the dust in your teeth, the weight of silence, or the stubborn way two people can hold on when the world tries to tear them loose, then don't forget to like the video, leave a comment down below, and follow the channel. Tell us where you're listening from. Stories like this don't just belong to one man or one woman. They belong to everyone who believes that even broken lives can be built again. Now let me tell you how it ended, or maybe how it truly began. By July, the land baked dry under skies so pale, it hurt to look at them. Cicadas screamed in the mesquite, and the barrels out back had to be rationed careful. But inside that cabin, there was no hunger, no drought, no emptiness. Saka moved across the floor in the rolling seat I built her, arms steady, calluses on her palms, proof of how far she'd come. She could reach the stove, the shelves, even the back door ramp without asking me for help. Sometimes I catch her outside in the yard, blanket across her lap, scattering corn for the chickens, her face calm in the sun. And every time I saw her like that, alive and unafraid, I knew I hadn't just carried her out of the dirt. I'd carried myself out too. The soldiers never came back. Maybe they gave up, maybe they lost interest, or maybe the desert simply swallowed their trail. I didn't spend much time asking why. The truth was simple. We had outlasted them. And in this land, sometimes outlasting is the closest thing to winning. Life took on a rhythm I hadn't known in years. I rose before sunup, as always, and worked the land. But now when I came back in, there was coffee already warming on the stove, the smell of it filling the room. She'd pour me a tin cup with steady hands, set bread on the table, and ask me about my hip like she cared for the answer. Those small things, the things I used to take for granted, they became the bones of a life I thought I'd never have again. One morning, I found her on the porch, wrapped in the thick blanket she'd stitched from scraps. The valley stretched quiet below. No riders, no dust trails, just peace. She looked at me, her dark eyes catching the sun, and said, "They're not coming." I believed her. For the first time, I let myself believe it. We started building more than safety then. She carved beads and bone charms, tied them on strings across the cabin walls. I added shelves, hammered new boards into place, repaired the roof with iron sheeting so the rain, when it came, wouldn't find its way through. At night, we ate together, not across a table like strangers, but side by side, our shoulders touching, our silences full. One evening, she asked me, "Do you miss your old life?" I stared at the fire for a long time before answering. Number not, even before the war. The only thing I miss is the things I never had. She touched my hand then, soft and certain. Like this. I looked at her, the firelight catching the scar across her cheek, the strength in her jaw, the warmth in her eyes. "Yeah," I said, "like this." There's a lesson I carried from all of it, one I never thought I'd say aloud. You can lose near everything, a family, a war, your own reason to wake in the morning. And still, life has a way of setting something in your path that makes you choose again. And choosing is the hardest part. It would have been easier to ride past that ravine, leave her to the sun, keep living half dead myself. But I didn't. And because of that, I'm not alone anymore. She told me once, "I'll kill for this place." I believed her. But more than that, she lived for it for us. And I learned that living for something takes more grit than dying for it ever will. At night, when she curled against me, her head resting on my chest, I'd listen to her breathing and think of the words she gave me. Husband. No preacher said it. No law wrote it down. But it was truer than any paper could make it. And when I called her wife, she held it the same way. Not as a title given, but as a truth chosen. The wind still rattles the shutters some nights, and I know the desert doesn't forget. Maybe one day more riders will come. Maybe the world will remember her name and call her enemy again. But I also know this. We'll face it together. She won't be left behind a second time, and I won't live like a ghost anymore. So, if you take anything from this story, take this. Don't let the world convince you that broken means finished. Broken is just another way of saying you're ready to be remade. Now I'll leave it there. The land outside waits for me. The chores don't quit. And the woman I call wife is probably already at the stove, cursing in Apache at the cornbread that never quite cooks even. But I'll eat every bite, same as I always do, because it ain't about the bread, it's about the life we've built between us, scarred and stubborn, but ours. And if you're listening still, I'll ask you one more time. Like the video, leave a comment, follow the channel, tell us where you're watching from. Maybe your story don't look like mine, but maybe, just maybe, it'll remind you that even in a world that takes and takes, you can still choose to stay.